Good morning. It's Councilman Rasmussen here coming to you with an update from our special council meeting on January 11th. Our normal council meetings are the first and third Mondays of the year, but we do on or of the month, sorry. But we do hold when necessary special council meetings where we have a specific agenda item that we need to talk about outside of the regular business. I mentioned this couple of weeks ago that we had scheduled it because we needed to have a deeper conversation very specific to the town budget and taxes as it relates to our ability to fund the needs of the town this year and going forward. Not a normal council meeting where there's a bunch of different agenda items and public speaking and all of those sort of presentations. We did have a presentation from our auditor, which we had to delay from the last council meeting because they were not able to attend. That was fairly performative presentation. We've already seen and reviewed the audit, given feedback on it, and essentially they wanted to just to present the findings to us, and then we did finally approve the audit. Now, to be clear, this is the audit from 2021. We are now starting the audit from 2022 that ideally will be done around June of this year. This one took a lot longer. We had a new auditor. We did a lot of things that were a little bit different. This next audit with the same auditor, a lot of the similar findings and things are going to be there. So it should take a lot less time in order to complete the 2022 audit. So we had the presentation. We approved the audit. But the real meat of the conversation was around the current liabilities that the town has and our ability to meet our obligations based on our tax rate. So here's the history part of this. Sometime going back about 10 years or so, it appears around 2012, a decision was made on the part of the council at that time to no longer fully fund the pension obligations every year for our existing pension systems. The town actually has a few different pension systems. We have two what we call legacy pension systems. These are pensions that were created a number of years ago, a long time ago. There's only currently about 15 people still in these legacy systems because we've moved almost everybody a number of years ago into the state system. But the existing pension systems that we had, what we call our legacy systems, we still have the obligation to meet the payments that those staff members who either participated in and have since retired or who will eventually possibly retire from the town, we have an obligation to provide the pension for them that we've committed to. And in order to do that, every year we have to make what is called an actuarially defined contribution. It's an amount of money that we need to be putting into that pension system in order to make sure that the funds are there when those people need them in their retirement, and that we can meet our disbursements that are part of that retirement system. In 2012 or so, a decision was made to not fully fund 100% of the pension system. Before my time, there's disagreement about why it was done and who it was done and what the thinking was. And honestly, it doesn't really matter at this point because the end result is for 10 years or so, we funded a little bit less for a few years. And then eventually we got to the point where we literally put nothing into those pension systems. And over a decade, it dug a pretty deep hole, a hole in the tune of $11.5 million almost, is what we are in the hole right now between these two pension systems. One of them, it's not very bad. One of them, it's quite bad. There's two of them here. That $11 million hole, what it means is that we don't have enough money in there to pay the obligations for those employees in their retirement out of that pension system, and we'd have to make it up out of our general fund. It's the reason why you create pension systems and you put money into them up front. It's because if you put a little bit of money in today, when you need to take it out, you've got 20 years of interest and investment gains that can make up that amount. And that actuarially defined contribution considers those things. If you put in, X amount of dollars today, well, 20 years from now or whatever it is, when you need it, it will be the right amount to make sure that you're able to fund those pension obligations. If you don't have the money in your pension system, you have to make it up out of your general fund budget, which means that year, whatever that amount is, needs to also be part of the budget. Put the money in today, fund it in 2022 dollars, so when you need it in 2042 or 2023, sorry, I guess it's already that year, that you have the money available for you, and you put in less today than you would need to take out. Put in $200,000 today, it's going to be $1 million 25 years from now when you actually need it. It's smart. We dug a hole. We have two things having to do with this. One is we already have a hole, and two, we're still digging because we do not have the financial resources to make sure that we are putting in that defined contribution that we need to be putting in every single year. So every year that we don't meet that 100% of that defined contribution, the hole gets deeper. And we need to stop it. We need to stop digging, right? And then we need to start filling in that hole. And then there's other holes that we've got that we need to start considering, even not digging them or start filling those in. In rough numbers, I'm rounding here, we should be putting something around $943,000 a year into those legacy pension systems. Some amount of that is actually made up by our investments that we have there, that they can accommodate, and they can make up $450-ish thousand of that contribution, which meant that when we looked at our 2023 budget, we had about $500,000 that we needed to put into our budget in order just to meet that defined contribution that we should be putting into those systems. $500,000, not a little bit of money. And that doesn't start to fill in the $11.5 million hole. It just makes it so the hole doesn't get any deeper this year. So those are the main two things that sort of prompted this conversation. I'll throw in there at the beginning that there's a couple of other pieces that we talked about in this. One is that whether we like it or not, town costs go up every single year. Inflation adds, $100,000 or so, it's rough numbers, to the operating costs of the town every year. That's salary increases, it's the cost of paper and toner and gas and all of the things that fill in and increase our daily costs just to keep operating at the level that we were operating the year before. And the last piece of this conversation yesterday was really around the idea that right now, the town shifts about $1.5 million a year from our utility funds, water, sewer, and electric, into the general fund to pay general fund expenses. If you were to look at the general fund, the police department is like half of our general fund, and then the other half of it is pretty much public works, and then there's some administration that's part of it. But those are main things that we fund in the general fund are public works, the police department, and the administrative, bookkeeping, the office costs of the actual town. That $1.5 million that we shift over from our utility accounts every year means that we take money out of our utilities to pay our regular bills. And we don't have the reserves in our utility accounts that we should, because we are taking that money out to pay for reserves or to pay for general funds. So when we need money in our utility accounts, we have to borrow it. We have to go out and take out loans. We have to do bond issuances and things like that to cover major capital expenses that are associated with our utilities, right? This isn't like, you need to go out and fix something little, or this is when you have a sewer pipe failure on Commerce Street and you have to figure out how to address that, or planning for the future of we need a new water tower on the north side of town to allow the projected growth and opportunities in that area to happen. Those are the type of things we're talking about. We have to borrow money to pay for those because for a very long time, instead of leaving that excess in our utility accounts and letting it build up to give us a a well that we can tap into when we need these large expenses, we've been shifting those funds over into the general fund to pay for general fund expenses, administration, police, and public works. We do keep a little bit of money in, though there is a reserve amount that goes in that stays with water, sewer, and electric, but it's not enough to cover these big projects. It's enough to cover some of the small things and if you build it up over time, it could get there, but we're talking about not enough money is what it amounts to. So we have 4 things basically that the town has not been funding appropriately for a long time. We aren't putting in the right amount of money every year into our pension. We've got a hole in our pension that we have to fill. We haven't been adjusting for inflation as costs have gone up. And we're taking money out of our utility funds in order to pay our general fund expenses. So our conversation last night was, how can we stop that? What can we do that can stop the bleeding, right? Or stop digging the hole in the pension system, start filling it in, start planning for the known increases in costs that we have, and start making sure that our general fund expenses are paid out of our general fund, not out of our water, sewer, and electric funds, so that we can have the money in those funds for infrastructure projects that are coming down the pipe. Quite literally coming down the pipe in water and sewer, right? That was such a bad pun. We talked a lot about these numbers. We discussed wanting to make sure that we have the numbers right, getting an idea of what they are. In the end, this is sort of what it amounts to. Right now, the town has a tax rate of 44 cents per $100 of assessed value of your house. It's not the market value of a house, it's the assessed value. That 44 cents per $100 of assessed value, 1 penny of that generates around $104,000. So we bring in, from all the taxes in the town, we bring in about $4.6 million a year in tax revenue. We bring in more out of fees and transfer taxes and some other things, but we're talking about just the property taxes that everybody who owns property here in the town pays. Generates about $4.6 million, or every penny of tax generates around $104,000. If you start doing those numbers, the pension shortfall that we have is around $500,000. That's 5 cents. That's what the taxes would need to go up in order to just get us even, to stop digging the hole and cover that. To start filling in the hole, this $11.4-ish million hole that we've dug over the course of a decade, we have to figure out a plan to do it. We have to figure out a plan for all this. But if we wanted to fill in that hole in 10 years, we would have to raise taxes another 10 cents, almost 11 cents per $100 of assessed value in order to fill it in 10 years. In 15 years, it's 7 1/3 cents, and in 20 years, it's 5.5 cents. But this is a calculation. If we want to fill that hole in, it's going to take a lot longer to fill it in than it took for us to dig it. Right? We dug it in less than 10 years, and in order to fill it in, it could take us 20 plus years. And then the last thing is those utility funds, this $1.5 million a year that we cost shift. Right now, that's about 14.3 cents per year that it would take in increase in taxes in order to address that problem, in order to make sure that all general fund expenses were paid out of the general fund and the utility expenses, the utility revenues stayed in utilities so that they could be used for capital and infrastructure projects. All told, plus a penny a year for inflation, and you've got something in that 26, 27 cents that we actually need if we wanted to stop all of those things right now and dig ourselves out of that hole in 20 years. That's a lot. Frankly, it's totally unreasonable. That's 50% tax increase. And there's no way that anyone is going to stand for some crazy tax increase like that. But there is also no way that we dig out of the hole without doing something around the taxes. Taxes have sat stagnant in the town for a very, very long time. It's nice. Everyone likes having low taxes, but you get what you pay for. And right now, we're not paying to pay for our pension system. We're not paying for our infrastructure. We're not paying to basically our obligations for the future. And we're not even, right now, our budget doesn't even pay for our increased costs this year. So we kicked this around and we tried to come up with a proposal that we could begin to increase our tax rate at a rate that we thought was reasonable, that we thought was sustainable, and that could, over a long period of time, ultimately eliminate these things, right? Stop the bleeding, fill in the hole, and begin to and stop cost shifting from the utilities into the general fund. And we're going to do it over like 25 years, basically, is what it amounts to. Because doing it much faster than that, I think, puts a burden on the community that is probably unreasonable. Some people probably wouldn't mind, and it's not going to change everything, but that's not true for everybody in our community. And the decisions we make have to be reflective of the fact that we have people from all different financial, circumstances that we need to make sure are considered in this. What we came up with was a 3-cent tax increase this year with a commitment that we would continue that 3-cent tax increase for 5 years. All told, that is a 15-cent tax increase over the course of the next 5 years, phased in. And obviously the dollar for dollar looks different depending on your property. But that ultimately, in 2 years, that stops the bleeding, right? That closes we're not digging this hole that we're in. In 3 years, it gets us to the point where we are actually starting to put money in and start filling in the hole. And then over the following 18 years, it phases out that funding from the utilities into the general fund and makes sure that we are keeping as much money as we can in our utility funds so that we are not, at the end of the day, basically mortgaging our future infrastructure because we're not saving for it right now. It's not going to be fun. I'm sure that this is going to hurt some folks more than others. Nobody likes to do it. The problem is that it should have been started a decade ago, right? If we would have been planning for this and, adding a penny on a year of every year or something like that, we wouldn't be in a hole. But choices were made to dig a hole. We come along, now we have to dig out or fill in the hole and stop digging. And that's, I think, what we ultimately decided last night. It's on us, so I say we made this commitment for 3 cents a year for at least the next 5 years. We can't actually approve the tax rates for 24, 25, 26, and 27. We can only approve the tax rate for 2023. So we have to come back and re-up this every single year. That's actually probably a good thing because it gives us the opportunity to look at it and see whether or not those numbers still make sense. What we're doing right now is taking a best guess at how things will play out. What happened 12-ish years ago or so is that people probably made a best guess, or they made a guess, but they assumed a lot of growth in our tax base, that growth in the tax base would make up for the shortfall on the tax rate. It didn't happen. The Duck Creek Industrial Park didn't get built yet, right? We have one building there, and there's assumptions that the whole thing would be done, almost 7 years ago. Didn't happen, right? There were assumptions that there would be a lot of new housing growth, and that those new housing growths would fill in the tax rate, and it would include more commercial growth that goes along with it. It didn't happen. We grew slowly in a way that didn't allow us to even keep up with inflation, let alone bring in more resources than we were basically leaving on the table by not raising the tax rate. So when we did our projections, we assumed the worst case scenario, which is we're flat. We don't see growth in the housing market. We don't see growth in the commercial market. We don't see the industrial park filling up quickly. And we have to live with the tax base that we have. Obviously, we don't want that to happen, right? We have a worst case scenario, which is what we're basing our budget on. Hopefully, there's a best case scenario where everything happens, and maybe we end up someplace in the middle. And every year we can go back and we can look at this and say, all right, wow, we brought in a lot more money this year, or the tax base has grown more than we expected. And instead of it needing to be, a penny and a half next year in order to make up this gap, maybe it only needs to be half a cent, right? Or maybe it doesn't need to be anything, or maybe it needs to be, a penny every 2 years, or you figure out something. We will have to revisit this every single year with the lens of how do we get out of these holes that we are currently in. And I think that was the most powerful thing of the conversation last night. Agreeing on the first tax increase in a decade or so is important. Ideally, it's more important that we have agreement and understanding that there's a problem, and we're not going to solve the problem by, cutting $1,000 out of one random budget line, right? You don't make up $1 million by basically trying to snip hairs here and there. Like, you have to grow something new. And if the tax base doesn't grow, then the tax rate is what has to grow. And that's the situation that we found ourselves in. Not made by most of the people on council, but inherited, and right, you have to deal with the problems that you've got. So to sum it all up, right, we made a choice. We're implementing a 3 cent per $100 tax increase this year. You'll see that on your tax bill this year that comes out. I think they come out in June or so. That 3 cent tax increase will fund about a little bit more than $300,000 of our $500,000 hole that we have for this year. We have some budget reserves that we are going to use to fill in the rest of that $500,000 hole. It's about $192,000 or so that we're going to shift from our budget reserves so that the hole doesn't get any deeper, right? We stop digging this year. Next year, there'll be another 3% or 3 cent tax increase that will mean that we actually start shoveling a little bit back into the hole. We start filling it in. And the year after that, another 3 cents, which is now we start, pretty well kicking some dirt back in there. It's still going to take us 20 years after that point in order to get there, but at least we're getting started. I'm sure there's probably questions. I'm sure we're going to hear about this. There's certainly going to be folks who this impacts negatively, and I know we're going to hear about it. It's the unfortunate reality that you get what you pay for, and we haven't been paying for even the basics at this point. So we'll come back. You'll hear about this from me probably every year or multiple times a year as we have a chance to look at what these numbers say and to consider what the path forward is. If there's chances to add money to fill in the hole faster, we talked about if we have years where there's significant reserves or significant money left over at the end of the year, we can take that and we can put it into these pension systems. That helps us fill in that hole quicker. Maybe it means that we don't have to do the same amount of tax increases down the line in order to budget for it. But it's a 25-year problem. We ran the numbers out till I ran the numbers until 2050 to see what it ultimately looks like to 25, 27 years from now actually be out of this hole. So certainly reach out if anybody has any questions. I'm happy to elaborate on any and all of this. It's not a fun thing. Nobody left happy last night. But in the end, it's the work that needs to happen, and we're the council that had to do it because folks before chose not to. So hope everybody has a better day than I did last night. And please reach out. Let me know if you got any questions. I'm always happy to be there. And our next regular council meeting will actually be next Tuesday. So you'll see an update from me from that council meeting. Probably, I think so Martin Luther King Day is on the 16th. The council meeting is on the 17th. So I should have an update on the 18th from our agenda on our regular scheduled council meeting. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Take care.